Clara had never been the kind of woman to demand flowers or grand gestures. She had built her marriage on the belief that love, when real, didn't need to be performed, simply existed in the everyday, quiet and steady. But as she waited, in the candlelit kitchen, the clock ticking past midnight on their 10th anniversary, a slow, cold certainty began to settle in her chest. Ethan hadn't simply forgotten. He'd remembered and decided it wasn't worth showing up for. When the door finally opened, his expression wasn't guilt or surprised, it was something sharper, something that sliced through her before he even spoke. His eyes skimmed over the untouched dinner, the faint scent of roses wilting on the counter, and the corner of his mouth curved in what could only be called contempt. Not the kind born of a single moment, but the kind that had been festering, growing quietly in the dark. She smiled. It was small, almost polite, the kind of smile that could pass for forgiveness if you didn't look too closely. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing the wound. If this was the game he wanted to play, she would play it better. Her voice was steady when she asked about his evening, letting him believe she was swallowing her disappointment whole. The next week, she said a quiet test, one he would never notice unless he was looking for it, and Ethan had long stopped looking. She moved a folder from his desk drawer to the locked cabinet in the study, the one he assumed she never touched, a folder that wasn't hers, filled with bank statements and property records under a name she didn't recognize. She left a single paper out of place, a whisper of a breadcrumb, and waited. 2 days later, it was gone, replaced neatly, but now, she knew. Her suspicion had been right all along. When she came home early on Friday, the scent of an unfamiliar perfume met her before she reached the living room. And there, sitting on her couch like she belonged, was a woman Clara had never seen before, beautiful, young, her eyes scanning Clara's home as if taking inventory. Ethan's voice floated from the kitchen, casual, as though nothing about this scene was unusual. Clara didn't raise her voice or ask questions. She simply looked at him and, for the first time, saw him not as her husband, but as a stranger, wearing his skin. And in that instant, the grief was gone. All that was left was calculation. Would you like me to continue the rest of the revenge arc for this story in the same seamless style so it builds all the way to Ethan's downfall? For 8 years, Clara and Daniel had been the couple others pointed to when they wanted to believe in lasting love. Friends spoke of them as if they were proof that marriage could stay golden. Their smiles and photographs were convincing. Their hands linked at parties without thought. But under the varnish, hairline fractures had begun to spread. Clara felt them in the quiet spaces between conversations, in the way Daniel's laugh didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. Small things, at first, easy to ignore until they weren't. The first shadows crept in quietly. Daniel's workdays stretched into the night with increasing regularity, his phone lighting up with messages he'd angle away from her view. Holidays they once celebrated with care now passed unmentioned, their shared rituals abandoned to gather dust. At first, she told herself it was temporary, the symptom of a stressful year, but the unease wouldn't let go. It sharpened each time she noticed him disappearing into himself. When she tried to confide in those closest to her, they waved her off with easy reassurances. "You're imagining it, Clara. He's just under pressure." Even her own sister suggested she stop reading into things. It was as if her instincts, honed over years with him, counted for nothing. She learned to stop speaking her doubts aloud, letting them coil inside her instead. The proof she couldn't voice began showing itself in the smallest details. Daniel returned from late meetings smelling faintly of a cologne she didn't own. His wardrobe shifted subtly at first, then suddenly two sharper, more tailored pieces. And there was the way his gaze skittered away from hers in moments that used to hold connection. If she asked a question, his answer arrived too quickly, as if rehearsed. She decided she needed something undeniable, something that would expose the truth without her having to beg for acknowledgement. The opportunity arrived in the form of their upcoming anniversary. Once a date they would spend weeks planning, it had slipped from their conversations entirely. Clara leaned into that absence, saying nothing, letting the silence become a test. On the night itself, she didn't set the table. She didn't buy flowers. She simply waited, curious to see if he would notice. He didn't. When he walked through the door, his eyes never landed on her. He sat with his phone, scrolling as though she were part of the furniture. The hum of the screen filled the space where their celebration used to live. At one point, without looking up, he said, "You know, some people just can't let go. They cling to things long after they're dead." His tone was casual, almost philosophical, but the words landed like a slow knife in her chest. She stored them away, understanding that this was not an offhand comment, it was a preview of where he was headed. She smiled, nodding as if she agreed. Her voice was light when she asked about his day. Inside, something had shifted. She wasn't going to beg, plead, or fight for a place he'd already decided she didn't belong. That night, she began crafting her exit, not in chaos or anger, but with the kind of precision Daniel would never see coming. The performance of the perfect wife would continue, but beneath it, every move would lead her closer to the door, and to the kind of ending he would never forget. Clara worked in silence, her movements as measured as her breathing. While Ethan slept, she sat in the dim light of her study, poring over months of phone bills and bank statements. Every call log, every transaction became a breadcrumb, each one leading her deeper into the truth he thought was buried. She wasn't looking for an answer anymore, she was collecting proof, the kind of proof that left no room for denial. Patterns began to emerge, and with them came the ghosts of moments she had brushed aside. She remembered the times he'd taken his phone into the bathroom, even in the middle of a meal, the vague explanations for sudden trips, the hotel bookings he'd claimed were for team conferences. Those unexplained charges at first. Then boulders suddenly fit together like the corners of a puzzle she hadn't realized she was building. All along, through it all, Clara never let the mask slip. She kissed him goodbye in the mornings, texted him reminders about dinner, laughed at his jokes. Her hands lingered on his shoulders just long enough to sell the image of devotion. He had no idea the warmth in her voice was camouflage, hiding the sharpened edge beneath. Then she found it, the single detail that turned suspicion into certainty. A printed receipt tucked carelessly into the wrong folder, showing a dinner for two at a restaurant he had once promised to take her to. The signature at the bottom was his. The name on the reservation, Sophie. That was the thread she needed, and she pulled. Through a trusted friend in the events business, she traced Sophie's schedule, galleries, weekend trips, dinners that matched Ethan's late nights perfectly. They weren't just overlapping. They were inseparable. Every confirmation was another nail in the coffin of the life he thought he controlled. The pile of evidence grew quickly: dated photos, overlapping GPS data, transaction logs with matching timestamps. She stored it all in a cloud account he didn't know existed, labeled under something as innocuous as tax files. It wasn't enough to catch him. It had to be undeniable, inescapable, and timed to land when he least expected it. Ethan's arrogance worked in her favor. He had grown so sure of himself, so convinced of her ignorance, that he stopped covering his tracks. He talked more, smiled more, thinking his double life made him untouchable. Clara let him believe it, even encouraging his confidence, because the higher he climbed, the further he would fall. In the weeks that followed, she shifted quiet sums into her own account, making it look like routine transfers. She met with a lawyer under the guise of a book club meeting, ensuring every legal thread was ready to pull. By the time the truth surfaced, her position would be unshakable. Her future already secured, and as the final pieces fell into place, she could see the end like dry land after a long, brutal swim. Just a little further, and she would stand on firm ground, safe, untouchable, and free while the storm she had been building broke over Ethan's head with all the force she had been saving for this moment. Ethan left early that Thursday morning, with a neatly packed suitcase, a quick kiss on Clara's cheek, and the familiar line about a 3-day conference trip. She nodded, warm and unassuming, her smile the same one he had always taken as proof of her trust. He walked out the door, convinced she would spend the weekend tending the house, perhaps baking something for when he returned. He never considered that she was already 10 steps ahead of him. The truth arrived in the form of a friend's harmless Instagram story, 30 seconds of seaside sunlight, ocean waves, and Ethan's unmistakable laugh drifting from the background. Then the camera panned, and there was Sophie, her hand on his arm as they leaned across a table scattered with wine glasses. The caption was nothing more than weekend vibes, but it was enough. Clara watched the loop twice, each time feeling the satisfaction of certainty settle deeper in her chest. The time stamp was precise, the location tagged, and Ethan's face perfectly clear. It was more than proof, it was the kind of evidence that didn't need explanation. She downloaded the video instantly, forwarding it to her lawyer with a single line: "Add this to the file." Then she tucked her phone away, expression as calm as if she'd just finished reading the weather report. There would be no confrontation. Not yet. Instead, she sent him a short, affectionate text. "Hope the conference is going well. Don't work too hard. Love you." She knew he'd read it as reassurance, another sign that his careful lies were holding. The bait was too sweet for him to resist. His response came with a photo of some generic hotel conference room, no doubt pulled from an old work trip. She replied with a heart emoji, giving him the comfort of thinking she was still the woman who believed every word. The very next day, the joint account showed a flurry of charges: champagne dinners, spa services, a boutique hotel bill that made Clara almost laugh. He was so certain of his invisibility that he didn't bother hiding the trail. By the time Saturday rolled around, the pattern was obvious. Every indulgence, every extravagant purchase with Sophie was another brick in the wall closing around him. He was documenting his own betrayal, and Clara didn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. His arrogance was her greatest ally, and she let him keep building, knowing that when the moment came, the fall would be one he could never recover. From Ethan's absence was the opening Clara had been waiting for. While he lounged by the ocean with Sophie, she sat in her lawyer's office, sliding over the neatly organized file of proof. The photographs, receipts, and timestamps were enough to dissolve any argument before it began. By the time the ink dried on her signature, the petition for divorce was filed with grounds so indisputable that even Ethan's most persuasive lies would crumble. She walked out with a quiet sense of finality, the kind that came not from rage, but from knowing the first domino had been tipped. Her next call was to the bank. With a few concise instructions, she froze every joint account, canceled every shared card, and rerouted her income into a private account he couldn't touch. The man who loved to flaunt his wealth would return to find his financial empire suddenly hollow, his credit cards useless, his safety net gone. She imagined the moment he'd hand over a card for some indulgent purchase, only to have it declined. The humiliation would be delicious, but she'd never need to see it to savor it. Back home, the locksmith worked quickly, replacing every lock on the doors. By the time she was done, the house had shed the last traces of his ownership. On the front door, she left only a single legal envelope, taped at eye level where he couldn't miss it. No key, no note, just the silent message that his chapter in this home had ended. Inside that envelope waited the full weight of her strategy. Divorce papers sat on top, crisp and undeniable. Beneath them, official bank freeze notices detailed the financial walls closing in around him. And, as the final blow, she included glossy printouts of his seaside rendezvous with subfitum stamped, location tagged, and impossible to dispute. She wanted him to hold them in his hands, to feel the proof he'd so carelessly left behind. But Clara's revenge wasn't only aimed at him. Through an anonymous account, she sent Sophie's employer a neat packet of receipts, hotel bills, and candid photographs, each one a violation of the company's strict conduct rules. She didn't need to embellish. The truth was damning enough. In one afternoon, Sophie's professional facade would fracture, her career dangling by the same careless thread Ethan had spun for himself. The social collapse came next. Clara's evidence found its way to mutual friends, old colleagues, and even his closest drinking buddies. Screens lit up with images of him in sunlit laughter with Sophie. The same weekend he'd sworn he was at a work conference. The man who'd cultivated a spotless, loyal image was suddenly the subject of whispers, group messages, and quiet blocks on social media. His reputation didn't just tarnish, it disintegrated. When the calls came, they were sharp with fury, then heavy with desperation. He demanded explanations, then begged for conversation. Each attempt met only the finality of a blocked number. The silence was deliberate, a wall he could never scale. She knew that absence could wound deeper than any shouted accusation, and then, with the same composure she'd kept from the start, Clara erased the last traces of him. Photos deleted, contacts cleared, his name gone from every account. No tear marked the moment, no satisfaction was displayed, only the quiet knowledge that she had ended the story entirely on her terms. When she closed her laptop and stepped outside into the crisp morning air, she felt lighter, untethered. The past was gone, and in its place stood something sharper and stronger. Some endings roar. Hers simply closed with a click, clean and irreversible. Ethan's downfall didn't arrive like a storm, it came like slow rot, hollowing him from the inside until the structure finally gave way. The man who once commanded rooms with easy charm now couldn't walk into a cafe without whispers following him. Former friends averted their eyes, not from pity, but from the discomfort of seeing a man stripped bare of all pretense. The joint accounts he once leaned on were gone, the property he'd called home now locked against him, and the career connections he'd bragged about quietly severed ties. By the time the public humiliation settled into something quieter but far more enduring, Ethan realized the truth: his reputation would never fully recover. Sophie's departure was as swift as it was cold. One day she was beside him, the next she was a name missing from his contacts and a toothbrush gone from his bathroom sink. Scandal had no use for loyalty, and Sophie had no intention of sharing his exile. In her absence, the silence became heavier. No dinners out, no shared laughter, no one to distract him from the echo of his own disgrace. Isolation set in like winter frost, slow, invasive, and impossible to ignore. While his world shrank, Clara's expanded. She signed the lease on a sunlit apartment she'd once considered a far-off dream, and furnished it exactly to her taste: light, uncluttered, and entirely her own. She accepted a new position at a firm that valued her skills rather than her husband's connections, and for the first time in years, her work felt like a genuine achievement, without his shadow stretching over her every step. She moved with a freedom she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Her success spoke volumes, though she never needed to say a word. Colleagues saw her as sharp and composed, acquaintances noticed her confidence, and those who knew the past could read the unspoken truth in her steady gaze. The achievements stacked up: promotions, invitations, the kind of recognition that couldn't be taken away. It was a language Ethan could understand better than any shouted confrontation. Her life was not just intact, it was thriving without him. Years later, their paths crossed by accident on a quiet street. He saw her first, paused mid-step, and tried to summon the easy grin that had once undone her. She was different now, poised, luminous, untouched by the years that had worn him down. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, long enough for him to see that she recognized him, and longer still to realize she wasn't stopping as she passed. The faintest smile curved her lips, not warmth, not mockery, but something far sharper: indifference. It was the kind of look that closed a door forever. Ethan stood there long after she was gone, the weight of his old certainty pressing on him. He had once believed she would never leave. Now, he knew the truth: she had left, and she would never return.